Bonjour, soyez bienvenus, messieurs et mesdames. Il me fait grand plaisir de vous présenter aujourd'hui Louise Penny. Hello, Louise.
Beautiful.
Isn't that fun?
Bonjour, madame, ma belle Barbara.
Louise has come all the way from Canada, and specifically from Quebec, to visit with us today. And Quebec is an interesting province linguistically, is it not?
It is. Well, as you know, because you've been there a number of times, it's French and English.
Right.
Yeah, so it's mostly French, minority Anglophone, and they don't always get along. So it's a really interesting province to live in.
You've understated that. When I was last in Quebec, there was a
There are bombs going off?
Well, it wasn't quite that bad, but there was a really serious sort of a crest in the separationist whatever tide, which seems to have then sort of turned the other way again. I mean, it didn't make a lot of sense economically, but I can see that culturally it was really important to those with French ancestry in eastern Quebec to feel an equal part of the country.
Of Canada, and they don't. They don't feel an equal part, and they keep being told that you are equal. Canada is officially bilingual, French and English, but the Francophones don't. And for good reason. For many, many years, the English minority, particularly the English minority in Quebec, held all the power. They held the CEO positions, they ran the banks, they ran the schools and the universities, and they felt it was considered a bit like South Africa by the Francophones, that here is this minority that has a really untenable amount of power. And there's a lot of bitterness, and that's, you scratch the surface in Quebec, a lot of that bitterness still comes up.
Well, I brought it up in part because it figures into your books necessarily, which are set in Quebec, and in particularly, I think, in your Rule Against Murder, your latest, your fourth book with Inspector Armand Gamache, that there is tension among the guests at Manoir Bellechasse, and part of it you managed to portray with this difference in whether they're French or English speaking.
Yeah, something I really struggle with in my books, because I don't want to give the wrong impression that there's open warfare in the streets, or even that it's that big a factor, because it's not in most people's lives. I lived there as an Anglophone minority, and now the Francophones have quite rightly taken back the majority of the power, and it is much more of a democracy than it might have been before. But the tensions still exist, and I wanted to portray that, particularly among, you know what it's like. You're always going to get unreasonable minority positions, where you're going to get extremists in any school of thought. And certainly within the Anglophone, in this particular book, a family of Anglophones takes over a luxury inn in order to celebrate an event. And my hero, Armand Gamache, who's Francophone, is there with his wife. And this Anglophone family treats him a bit like the hired help, as though he doesn't really belong there.
I call him a shopkeeper, if I remember.
That's
they
right.
think of him as the shopkeeper.
The shopkeeper,
and in fact, they
his
suspect
cleaning woman wife.
Yes, and they suspect him and possibly his wife of the murder.
Of the murder,
just based on class, kind of, well, it can't be one of us. So
One of us. One of us. And in fact, that's actually a theme I explore in the next book, the book 5, which is coming out this October, is how many wars, how much ill feeling has been launched with that phrase, one of us.
Sure, but there's a tribal thing. It was interesting that since we're taping this program in January, but I'm not sure when it will air, so let me say that yesterday was the inauguration for Barack Obama, and I noticed in his speech he referred to tribal. And I thought how true that is, that in fact that's one of the things that has been so difficult working with what was at one point in my lifetime Yugoslavia, but in fact was never really a union. It was just kind of held together by Marshal Tito and collapsed when he went. But certainly it's always been true maybe in Scotland and Ireland, which had a Celtic tribal background. It's certainly true in the Middle East, where you have competing tribes. It's certainly true in India and Pakistan.
It's a real sense of belonging.
All over.
You
but
get
it's
gangs,
hard.
inner city gangs.
Yeah,
what else are clubs? families. We all have reason to feel as though we belong, but in doing that, there is an exclusionary, or there can be, element to it. You're not one of
Absolutely, and
us.
there are loyalties, personal loyalties that maybe run counter to larger responsibilities to the law and
That's
other
an
things.
interesting point, because that is one of the big dividing points in Quebec between the Anglophones and the Francophones. Quebec is different from the rest of Canada in almost every way, including its legal system. Its legal system is Napoleonic, which is based on the French, French, whereas the rest of Canada is English common law, which is based on Britain. The really fundamental philosophical difference is that Anglophones believe in the rights of the individual. The Francophone population in Quebec believes in its core of the need to look after the collective, that the collective is all important rather than the individual. So there's just a fundamental split in how they approach life, how they interpret events, how they approach problem solving. Everything is different, and so there is this clash, and both sides feel that the other is deeply flawed, of course.
I like the way you put that. Well, I mean, it obviously ebbs and flows. When I was in Eastern Canada, when I particularly noticed it was the year of the bird flu epidemic, which I cannot now place quite in my head. But
you were there.
We were. We braved all that and went to the
Everybody else was going in the other direction, and you went to Toronto.
Well, we'd agreed to go to the American Library Association convention, and we felt that, you know, we should carry on. And then we went on into Eastern Canada for several weeks, and not in Quebec City, but across in the Gaspé Peninsula, and in a lovely area there, very scenic, very gorgeous. There were literally not even English-speaking people. I mean, if you wanted to stay in a small hotel, that kind of thing. And I found that wonderful. And then we ended up on Prince Edward Island, which is this little sort of bastion of, you know, British, and really the seat of Canada is no longer a colony, but where Canada kind of, you know, created its independence. And we were there for Canada Day, which is a terrific celebration, but really very British. Actually, it felt very American on a 4th of July kind of, because July 1st is Canada Day, kind of celebration. And I could see, you know, that at that time the Francophones were kind of in an ascendant in regard to how seriously they wanted to be taken in terms of separation. And there was a lot of talk about maybe they'd finally get up a vote and all, and then it ebbed away again. And you know, it's been fairly quiescent, I think, for a while. So,
well, they have every now and then we hold a referendum,
right?
And the question is, should Quebec separate? Quebec holds that referendum.
Quebec, the province.
Quebec, the province, should separate from the rest of Canada,
right,
and form its own country. And the referendums always fail, although the last one was very close, shockingly close. I mean, almost passed. And then we all think, well, now that's over. But of course, in 5 more years, they'll run another referendum, and who knows what'll happen. So they keep trying it. I don't know what needs to happen for them to convince.
It isn't a huge part of your books, but I did think it worked out very well in your most recent book as a way to create division. I mean, crime novels are built on conflict, right? So the more you can introduce, the better off you are. But you said when we were talking last night in a different program that and I think it's important to remember that the French element in Canada really are a conquered people.
That's right. And they remember that. There is on their license plate, our license plate, because I'm a Quebecer, the slogan, the motto of the province is Je me souviens, which means, as you know, I remember. And what they remember is being conquered by the English in the 1600s. This is 400 years ago now almost that they were conquered, and they remember.